Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. Thank you for being with us. I'm Carl Gronberg, and I'm the host for the program, and I'm going to invite you to go with me on a journey. We're going to talk about adoptive families and some of the issues that are connected with, well, family life in general, but specifically today, we're going to talk about adoptive families. Be with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. I think you're going to learn something very important.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
I think a lot about families, and I think about how families take different shape and form in our life and in our community. Biological families, step families, foster families, and adoptive families. And there's a beautiful dynamic that goes on in family life. We have with us on Austin Faith Dialogue today two people who are going to share with us their views, their thoughts, their feelings about family and adoptive families. Janie Cravens, welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue, and Pam Hanna, thank you for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. Janie, you are known in the Austin area over 20 years. You worked in the area of adoptive families. You're known as an expert by some of the folks. Huh? I can say that, all right? I can say
well,
it.
that's one name people would call me, I suppose.
Tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had with adoptive families and some of the issues that are a part of being an adoptive parent.
Well, I think what I'd like to share is that there are lifelong issues in adoption for everybody involved, and people lose sight of that when they're just starting the adoption process. They're consumed with, how am I going to get a baby into this house or a child into my arms, which is perfectly natural. But they're so consumed with that, they often don't think about what's going to happen in 3 years and in 5 years and in 10 years. There are lifelong issues for adoptees, and I'll give you one simple one for each side of the triad, if you like. Here's one for the adoptee. The adoptee, the master question is, why did this happen to me? Because it doesn't happen to most people. Most people live with their genetic relatives. So there's one for the adoptee. Adoptive parents have lifelong issues around the loss of their fantasy child. Everyone has a fantasy child they thought they would give birth to, and it doesn't mean that they don't love their children through adoption, but it's a lifelong issue making peace with what it means to lose the fantasy child. And of course, birth parents, if you think about it, it's obvious for them. Lifelong issues have to do with, what does it mean in my life that I let one of my children go to someone else to be raised?
You describe this as a triad, that all of these individuals are involved in the issues, their own particular issues, and then bringing them together in an adoptive family. They all have various issues. Pam, you've been a part of that whole process. It's a real life experience for me, for you and for us, and I'd like you to talk about that, would you please?
Well, it's really the defining issue of my life. I mean, and probably before I was really aware consciously of how much it meant in my life, I would have said, no, adoption hasn't made any difference in my life, except then who raised me and where I grew up and who my friends are and who I ended up marrying and who my child is and so forth. So it is something that impacts every aspect of my life and every other adoptee's life, whether or not it's something conscious.
When did you come to that awareness that this was a defining issue in your life?
About a year ago, when I was 33.
So for all those years, you either were not aware of it, or you denied it, or you just put it on the back shelf?
A little of all of those, and maybe some other things. Being scared of dealing with it on some level.
Janie, as you listen to Pam talk about that, and watching Austin Faith Dialogue today, there are people who are involved in all parts of that triad that you talked about. And now we have Pam sharing her feelings and her thoughts with us, and that's very special to me, that she'll open up and do that type of thing. What would be your response to what Pam has said about coming to that awareness?
First, I want to say I'm grateful that she's come to share. You know, here's what I've learned in 20 years of listening to adoptees and working with them in their journey. All people are different in terms of how much curiosity they have about their genetic relatives. But for those of us who are not adoptees, we have only one source of information. It's listening to what they say. You know how that is in life. we want to tell people what they should or shouldn't think, or should or shouldn't feel, or how they should act. But adoptees are the only ones who know to teach us. And so what I've learned from adoptees is, of course, everyone is curious about their medical history. If somebody says they're not, I suspect they're using that psychological thing of suppression, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would be curious about their medical history. Everyone ought to be curious about their genetic relatives because it's natural to be so. How many of us do those family trees and, you know, pay money to the genealogist and go to Europe to find where our parents, you know, got on the boat?
Or wherever.
Wherever, yeah, excuse
Right.
me, wherever. So it's real natural. And that's how I came to the work, thinking, well, it's the most natural thing in the world to be curious about those relationships. Lots of adoptees, though, certain personalities, I'll say, have a much deeper need to know, again, why did my birth mother and how could she make this decision? Why did she make it? How could she make it? They have a more spiritual need in terms of understanding what happened.
May I interrupt you a second?
Lost my train of thought, so go ahead and interrupt me.
I'm going to jump in and say that in a theory of theology and from the clergy point of view, we talk about adoption in such a very positive sense. We have biblical illustrations of adoption, right? We have a guardian named Joseph, all right? And when we do adoption placements, we talk about how we're all the adopted children of God. So we try to elevate and emphasize the very healthy, positive part about being an adoptee. And I think maybe that's really what you've come to, isn't it, Pam? That you recognize that through these years, you are, in many ways, fortunate to have all of this family around you to be able to celebrate and to rejoice in. Tell us a little bit more. It's natural and normal that you want to know, as what I hear Jeannie saying about knowing your biological parents. Now, is it true that in Texas that you can't know all of that information that Jeannie was referring to? That you cannot know your medical history?
Well, I think it's better, but when I was adopted in 1964 and finalized in 65, and still I don't think there's any mandate for what agencies or other facilitators have to gather from birth families. I don't know that for sure, but in Texas, adoption records are sealed. I can't get my original birth certificate. I have an amended birth certificate with my adoptive parents' names on it, so it appears as if my adoptive mother physically gave birth to me. Even though I can look at it and see what the discrepancies are based on what family history I know now, such as addresses and dates and so forth. But when I first began my search, I went back to my adoption agency and requested first what we call non-identifying information, which means they found my file from 1964 and blacked out or whited out all the identifying aspects about my birth mother, and my birth father's name was not even in the file to obscure, and then they let me have a copy of that so that I had a piece of paper that said, you know, her parents were of Prussian descent or what have you. She was one of 4 children, but no dates, nothing that would let me find her on my own.
Janie, is this kind of par for the course, what Pam is describing? Is that kind of the process that happens when people want to find out about their birth parents?
Yes, usually, and let me say that Texas law does require that certain pieces of information are gathered from the birth family and shared with the adoptive family, although that's a law only about old. And so their agencies do have guidelines about what is shared, but it has to be non-identifying. So it doesn't have last names, addresses, birth dates, social security numbers, things that could help people make an actual connection to the family. Although lots of agencies today have post-adoption counselors who will help you by making a contact for you with the birth family and seeing if they would like to meet you as well. So a lot of agencies are sort of, come into the modern age in terms of how they help adoptees. But let me share this. I regained my chain of thought and want to say that for adoptees who do have a great need or even a small need for information or connection, it is not reflective of the quality of love in the adoptive family.
Exactly, yeah.
And that, again, lay people think that the adoptee who wants to search must be ungrateful to her adoptive parents or didn't love them enough or they did something wrong. It is not about that at all. It's about curiosity.
Yes.
Some people are more curious than others.
Normal, natural human curiosity. Where did I come from? Tell us, ma'am. Well, you have something else you want to say.
I just wanted to interject that, when I started searching, I told my adoptive parents, I said, you may not believe this, but this has nothing to do with you. You know, you could be the Queen of England or, you know, the most horrendous criminal, but I would still need to do this.
How did you find your adoptive parents? How did you find your
My
adoptive
birth parents?
Yes, your birth
I went
parents.
back to the agency that had placed me with my adoptive family, and just as Janie was describing, they, and as I mentioned earlier, they gave me my non-identifying information, and we went through a long counseling process, which is mandated by Texas law, and then they contacted my birth mother after turned out for me a simple search for her, and contacted her and asked whether she was interested, and did counseling with her, and then put us in contact with each other. But it was all very, very very regulated.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You are a mother, you are a wife, you are a daughter, and you live in all of these special relationships. We have some pictures that we'd like to show. We'd like to show your birth mother along with your son Price, and bring that up on the screen. And tell us a little bit about that, would you please?
well, it really floored me the first time I saw him sitting on her lap and looked from one face to the other. He looks more like her than either his father or me or anyone else on either side of the family. It just amazed me to be able to finally see someone with a physical resemblance.
And then we have a
That's
picture
strong.
of you with your birth mother. And
Let's
talk,
not dwell on that one too much.
talk about that whole experience. What has that been like? What did you feel and think when you first met her?
Well, our first phone call was about 3 hours long, and a lot of tears and questions. And the first question out of her mouth was, "Hate me?" And I said, "No." That was my social worker had warned me that was a very typical first reaction.
Jeannie, there's that triad again.
Yeah.
And there's that birth parent wondering how are they going to feel as
Living
well.
day to day
Oh.
with the
Right,
fear their child will
exactly.
hate them.
Yeah, she said she was terrified of that for all these years, which really makes me very sad. But no, I've never felt that. You know, all I was ever told by my adoptive family was, you know, she must have cared very much to be able to do this. And anyway, so the next question she asked me was, "Are you Christian? I hope you're a Christian."
A person of faith, that was very important for her to know. You're wonderful to come on and talk about this, because I think people watching Austin Faith Dialogue today are maybe really interested in knowing how this has gone for you. And I think Janie put it well. The whole idea that there's love for biological parents and there's love for adoptive parents, and that you can testify to that. What has grown in your life from this experience?
Well, just after I met my birth mother, and then shortly after that made contact with my birth father, I felt just such a tremendous sense of relief, of a weight being lifted off my shoulders that I hadn't been conscious of even having. Just a tremendous sense of relief, and just a real sense of validation, and feeling like I was just sort of finally connected to the family of man, or what have you. That I just finally sort of felt real.
Pam, Hannah, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And we invite you to come back and be with us in the second half of this program, as we're going to continue this very interesting story of adoptive families. Thanks for being with us. Welcome back to Faith Dialogue. We're having a powerful program, and we're so happy that you're with us, as we're talking about families and the shape of families, and particularly today we're talking about adoptive families, about birth parents and adoptive parents and adoptees, and what it means to be growing in relationship with one another so that God is glorified and so that everybody is blessed in this family experience. Janie Cravens, we talked a little bit during the break about what Pam shared with us in the first part of the program. That was very powerful, I thought, and this whole feeling of the birth mother. Does my daughter hate me for doing what I've done? What about these unknowns that are a part of the life of all of those people involved in the triad?
Yeah, again, it's all members of the triad. And just like in other areas of life, the fear of the unknown is much greater usually than the reality. So birth parents, I've worked in adoption 20 years, and I worked a lot with birth parents that first year, and I was so burdened by, they were living with wondering, oh, that 3-year-old killed in a car wreck, they read in the newspaper. Is that my child?
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that was such an unfair burden for them to live with day in and day out. They'd call me 5 years later and say, do you think my child is happy? And so living with that kind of unknown, and every birth parent is afraid their child will grow up to hate them and not understand what a sacrifice they made.
And
What a grievous thing they did to give their child a better life.
Exactly. And then the adoptive, the
Yeah.
adoptee,
Well,
right?
Let's jump to adoptive parents
Okay.
next,
All
if
right,
I might.
good, yeah.
Because I want to say this. Adoptive parents, as you'll hear over and over again in their words and in their stories, are afraid they're going to lose their child.
Mm-hmm.
I work with lots of families today who are going international. They're going to Russia or China to adopt a child because they feel that that's safer somehow, that they won't lose their child. So there's a lot of that, again, irrational fear because of the few famous cases.
Yes.
I say to families, if you're really that afraid, don't get in your car and drive today. You're much more at risk of having a car wreck than you are that the birth parent's going to come and take your child away. It's an irrational fear, but deep in every parent's heart, none of us want to lose our children, whether they come through adoption or not. So that's their big fear, is that the birth parent will take their child away, this thing they have desired so deeply. And, of course, adoptees, they are afraid that their birth parent may be monstrous. After all, our society is full of a lot of stereotypes about birth mothers that are mostly negative. They're prostitutes, they're drug addicts, they left me in a dumpster. Those are mostly negative. Adoptees often also swing completely the other way. She was the head cheerleader and he was the football person. I used to think Marilyn Monroe was my birth mother. Dates me a little bit. But so their fear that the birth parents are unsavory, are really unloving. Also, they fear that something was wrong with them and they caused themselves to be placed. That's a common fear. So again, a lot of fears of the unknown. And so some of us began 19 years ago to say, we need to do adoption differently today because we're a new generation of adoptees with these same concerns, and it's not necessary.
And what is that strategy that you started thinking about 19 years ago that we'd like to lead into in this portion of the program?
Well, we called it open adoption, meaning that there'd be some sort of authentic relationship between birth parents and adoptive parents. They can deal with their fears, they can kick and holler and cry, and then deal with real people. That way, adoptive parents have the information firsthand to share with their child when that child is 3 and 5 and 10 years old and a teenager. Okay, the times when it can really help them. Okay, it's valuable. Birth parents have the reassurance that their child is loved and happy and has the things they wanted them to have. Adoptees get reassured that the birth mother is a good person. She's not their mother. Okay, children know, they're not confused. People always ask me that, aren't children confused? No, children know who their mommy and daddy is. It's who they live with. They're not a bit confused.
That's right.
But I want to say one thing that happened that I didn't know would happen. And that is that in the very first face-to-face meeting I ever did, when the birth mother cried and said to the adoptive parents, "Thank you for taking my baby and raising her," I saw it happen. They got a blessing from the one person who had it to give.
Yeah, and how important those blessings are from one another.
Made such a difference to them.
Lane Holmstrom, welcome, friend.
Thank you.
A longtime friend of mine, and really thankful that you're on Austin Faith Dialogue. Talk to us about your journey, you and Glenda, and about a special little boy who came into your life. We're going to see his picture a little bit later on in the program, but talk to us about that.
Well, we wanted to have a family, and we couldn't have it in what's typically termed the natural way, but then after adopting, it seems the most natural thing to do.
Right.
And so we were in the process, and as we were in the process, my mother-in-law in Orlando asked for prayers for us at church and discovered that there was a 19-year-old woman who was 6 months pregnant, a member of the church, and had decided the week before to give the baby up. And my mother-in-law called me to ask if she wanted us if we wanted her to contact the birth mother. And we said yes, and we ended up talking to her, and my wife remembers the birth mother's little girl in the church, and the birth mother, great-grandmother remembered my wife as a little girl in the church. And we got together. My wife went out for the sonogram. We found out he was going to be a he. And when Daniel was due, we went to Orlando. We checked in the hospital with the birth mother. We spent from Sunday night through Thursday evening in the hospital with the birth mother. And Glenda was in the operating room. He was born C-section, and the doctor handed Daniel to her first, that the birth mother wanted him to do that. And we met the biological father the same weekend, and we liked him, and we have possibly the world's most open adoption. We felt going into it that Daniel might very likely want to know about these people, and we would certainly understand that they would want to know about him, and we decided that the more people that knew about him and cared about him, loved him, the better that would be. Now, honestly, having to share your child, that there are other connections out there, it wouldn't be our first choice, but having Daniel definitely is our first choice, and we wouldn't change anything about how we've done it. We feel like it's
when
the
you
best
went
thing
out
for him.
for his birth and to be there, did you not, with the birth father, play a little basketball?
We played basketball, and I'm older than his dad, so Daniel will go to kindergarten and show and tell and say that my dad's older than my grandparents. Can anybody top that? So I think that'll be interesting for him. So he has several sets of grandparents and aunts in Tennessee and Florida, and a lot of people that
And
care
your
about
mom
him
and dad, Buddy and Annette, are just
absolutely.
in love with that Daniel. They just think he's hung the moon. Now talk about, Janie, about this experience as you listen to Lane's story. You've not heard this story before, so
I
what's
have
your
not.
reaction?
I'm grateful again and feel like your son is very lucky because he won't struggle with a lot of what adoptees call the black hole. You know, a whole generation of adoptees thought they were manufactured at an agency. You know, the social worker pulled him out of a drawer or something, you know, and that's not so. You know, he has congruency and continuity in his life in a way. But I wanted to ask you a question. Can you speak to this issue about fear and how being in that relationship with the birth family reduces or makes more your fears?
Well, in our case, it reduced it significantly. Everybody sincerely is thrilled that Daniel's part of our family, and we have made efforts to include them in our family. When the birth father was married, about a year after Daniel was born, we went to the wedding, brought Daniel with us. They've been to our house several times. The birth mother we see once a year when we go to Florida, and we see her parents and her friends and her brother and all that, and everybody sees Daniel, and they send him gifts. We're very fortunate because from the moment we met them, we liked them. They have always referred to us as mom and dad. Not one time have they ever said anything other than, you know, go give this to dad, you know, and that sort of thing. So they've made it easy for us. They're grateful that we've included them because they realize that that was an option we had. Not a good option in our opinion because we think Daniel will want to know about these people. If he does, we've made contact. We have pictures. We have letters from them from the moment he was born. So he will know that he's a very loved little boy.
Yeah. And I hear again, this family's not confused about that love is not confusing. And again, people get confused and think if they include the birth parents or are compassionate and giving toward them, the child will divide loyalty. And the child won't. We have a lot of examples now in divorced families or step families. We can see how children adapt to relationships, but you know, adoption's sort of the last stronghold of how things ought to be done.
As I said, we wouldn't, if we had a choice of not sharing our child with other people, we wouldn't. But if we're very thankful that we couldn't have a biological child because we wouldn't have Daniel if we could. And
Well, here's the way I've heard other people say it. Adoption is second choice. It's not second best. You know, it's not second best. It's second choice, of course.
What a
And
nice
I
way
think
to
that's a
put
way, I love the way you're being so
Beautiful.
honest about that, because everyone
Let's
needs to
bring
know
up
that.
Daniel on the screen. Let's take a look at this guy.
He's adorable.
And there he is. This was Easter Sunday, right? And talk a little bit about this son of yours. What is it that he has brought into your life?
Extreme exhaustion and frustration and thrills and joy. And when he says, let's have a family hug, and we all stand together and lean forward and hug, and it's just incredible. Is a constant challenge and a constant joy. And you have to remember the joy is there sometimes, because the challenge part can be
But Lane
overwhelming.
and Jeannie, how is that different from any relationship in life? The challenges, the anxieties about what is going to happen. This is what life is all about. And I think that to be able to share it in the family relationship in a trusting way. Is this why you advocate?
Absolutely. What I say to people is adoptive parenthood has a different foundation than biological parenthood. Most of it's exactly the same. Joys,
What do you mean by it has a
sorrows,
different
expenses,
foundation?
because how the family came together is different. And the difference in an adoption-built family is the child has two sets of parents. Okay, and if a man and woman marry each other, have a biological child, and stay together and raise the child, that's not the case. An adoptee has two sets of parents. And I also say to families, if you're in a closed adoption or you're going to China to get a child to avoid this, believe me, the birth parents still live at your house because they live in your child's head. You just don't know anything real to tell them. And you have to say a lot of, I don't know. That's the only difference.
You use the word blessing. That's another good word. We said that adoption is a great word from the point of view of theology, but blessing is also one of those great words from the point of view of our faith. Blessing. How have you seen blessing Lane in your life and being an adoptive father?
Seeing my dad walk hand in hand with Daniel down the sidewalk, the almost out of control joy in my mother's face when Daniel walks up to her and gives her a hug. Having this little guy to take care of and to come bring you a book and want you to point out words and explain what this means. And if you don't say it the same way you did last time, he'll correct you. And had a shirt with some different symbols on it, and I told him one time what it was, and he said, no, that's an I don't know. Because the time before I said, I don't know what that was. You know.
Lane, you and Glenda have been a blessing to Daniel and to us. And Janie, thanks for being with us on this program. Blessings in your work and your ministry, and to Pam, Hannah, and her family, blessings. And choose life that you and your family, your children may live. May that be God's invitation to us, that we live our lives in that faith. Choose life with family. Thanks for watching Austin Faith Dialogue. Peace be with you.